Hello and welcome back to Nathan Bell's podcast. Be sure to like, subscribe and share with your friends. Today, Nate would like to talk about euthanasia.
Yeah, so today I'm going to talk about euthanasia. I'm definitely a big supporter of euthanasia. I can't imagine having, stage 4 cancer or some debilitating condition where you're in absolute agony and suffering and feeling nothing but pain and immense pain and being forced to continue living when there's the option to die, because people living in excruciating pain and just constant continuous pain, they need to, if there is no treatment available and no way to cure them, they need to have the right to die, because that's no way to live, and that's no way to spend the last time of your life. So I think we need to move on from keeping euthanasia illegal, and we need to move into legalising euthanasia. But there does need to be a strict process to make sure that only people who can't be treated and cured of their condition are euthanized. Like, imagine if all it took to get euthanized was to say that you're depressed about life and to say that you're living in mental misery or suffering, and to say that you didn't want to live because you saw no purpose or meaning or worth to life, and then you could get euthanized. That's not acceptable. Certainly euthanasia is not acceptable for suicidal people who just don't want to live, and not acceptable for people with mental health conditions that can be treated. So when a condition can be treated, we shouldn't be euthanizing people. So yeah, absolutely. But we have to be careful too about how we define suffering, because some people would argue, some very extremist thinkers might argue that we should euthanize people with Down syndrome, because they would say that a person with Down syndrome lives in a state of suffering, and can't live a quality life. Now, I disagree with that. I have known in my life many Down syndrome people who are very happy and live quality lives full of joy and happiness and feel a sense of reward and satisfaction with life. But certainly some people would argue that people with Down syndrome should be euthanized because they can't live a quality, satisfying life. So we have to be careful about how we define suffering. As I said, we can't define that we can euthanize people with depression who just don't want to live, because that can be treated with medication, and we shouldn't define that we should euthanize someone with Down syndrome because we say they're suffering, because I find that biased, because there are many happy and satisfied people with Down syndrome. Euthanasia should be reserved for people who are in excruciating agony and physical agony. But then how do you distinguish between the ramifications of physical agony and excruciating pain and mental agony? Because mental agony can be just as bad as physical agony, but we can treat depression with medication, and we can lift a person's mood and hopefully improve their quality of life with medication. So really, I think that euthanasia should be reserved for people with a terminal illness who are living in excruciating agony and suffering, and going through immense physical pain. And we really need to let people like that who are in that position die, if that's their choice, and it needs to be their choice to die. Because again, and the mentality is, I suppose, what if we euthanize someone, then 2 years later a cure for their condition is found? Isn't that disappointing? But really, we can't sit around allowing people to live in a state of constant suffering and agony on the hope that a cure for their condition may be found in time to treat them. And it's important to note we euthanize animals as well when they are suffering and when they are in pain and agony, and when their quality of life has deteriorated. And we're quite whimsical about how we euthanize animals. Like, I've known animals to be euthanized where I think they still could have lived a quality life. So we're quite whimsical in our willingness to euthanize animals when we determine that they are suffering and can't live a quality life. So why can't we euthanize humans who we determine are suffering and can't live a quality life. But really, it has to be a choice for the patient whether they're euthanized. They have to decide whether they want to keep fighting and whether they want to keep living. Because we have to value life, and we have to value that people value their own life. So if a person is in absolute agony and excruciating pain, but they want to keep fighting, we can't make the decision for them to die. It has to be their decision. And that's when it comes into things like, well, what about someone who is comatose or paralyzed, and they can't communicate what their wishes are. So they might be in a state where they can't communicate their wish to die, or they can't communicate their wish to continue living. So do we have the right to come in and say, oh, well, this person's quality of life is so poor because they're in this comatose, paralyzed state, they can't communicate whether they want to live or die. So we're going to make the decision for them that they should die because of their poor quality of life. So really, it's very tricky issue, euthanasia, and we have to think long and hard about how we determine what suffering is and what suffering constitutes a person dying and letting a person die. And preferably, people before they're euthanized should have the ability to voice that they wish to die, and we shouldn't come in with like comatose, paralyzed people and make that decision for them, because they might be in a coma and paralyzed, but they might still want to live, so we don't have any way of determining that when they can't communicate. So yeah, that's why it's such a tricky, complicated discussion, euthanasia. But certainly we have to value life, and there's concerns that if we start euthanizing people, it will start diminishing the value of life, and we'll start saying, oh, well, all those people can be euthanized because they've got Down syndrome and they've got mental illness and their quality of life is poor, and we'll start dismissing people and dismissing their value of life and coming up with all these reasons to euthanize people who could otherwise live happy, satisfying lives. So yeah, this is why it's such a tricky conversation. And when we legalize euthanasia, which we will, because we'll come to a point where we realize we can't let people live in agony anymore, we have to be very careful, and there has to be very strict controlled regulations around how the decision is made to approve a euthanasia, and it has to be made by experts and professionals in the medical profession, and preferably wherever possible with the consent of the person who we have determined is living a poor quality life. As I said again, it's that situation where they're in a coma and they're paralyzed and they can't communicate whether they want to live or die. That's one of the more tricky situations with determining whether to euthanize someone. But wherever possible, it should be the patient's choice to say, I wish to stop living because I'm in too much agony and too much suffering. So wherever possible, we should only euthanize people who can voice to us that they have had enough and that they want to stop living because the pain is too much. So there's some thoughts about euthanasia, very complicated subject. So drop a comment in the comment section what you think about euthanasia.